So these three airbrushes walk into a bar, and the bartender says, "You know, I don't have any airbrush jokes." Hey, I'm John. I'm going to be doing a few videos in my scale modeling how-to series about airbrushing. Everything from how to pick an airbrush to how to thin your paints, talk about air pressure, and the basics to hopefully help you get started, or if you're looking to pick a new airbrush, to give you some things to look for in doing that. I hope to answer some common questions and maybe get you past some of the hurdles that I faced early on in airbrushing, so it'll be a little easier for you. Now, if you've spent any time on any forum or any Facebook group for scale modeling, you know somebody always asks the question, "Hey man, I want to get started in airbrushing, and I was just wondering, which airbrush should I get?" Of course, as soon as somebody asks that, the answers start coming back, and they generally sound about like this. "Well, let me tell you what you need to do. You need to get the Sparwatowadger 5000 Super Blow. It's the best one. When you use that, it's talent in an airbrush. Guaranteed every time. I've used it probably 3 or 4 times over the last 20 years, and it's great." Okay, so maybe not all answers are exactly like that. Maybe some are a little more helpful, but some are a little less helpful, we have to admit. So what I thought I'd cover in this video, this one, today, is just some straight talk about what's really important when you're getting into airbrushing. And it's not the airbrush. Okay, now it is sort of the airbrush, but not really. And by that I mean you do have to get a decent quality airbrush in terms of engineering. So we've got to identify that cheap in this sense is talking about engineering, not price. A cheap airbrush that's well engineered will work fine. But whether you get the cheapest airbrush in the world or the most expensive airbrush in the world, there's 3 things that if you don't pay attention to, none of it's going to matter. I've had a blog article out for a while that talk about this, so if you've read that, I'm not going to be discussing anything really new, but maybe you haven't seen it. When I started airbrushing, I got my airbrush, I got my compressor, I loaded the paint in the airbrush, I sprayed it on my model, and when I was done, I looked at it and I thought, it looks like crap. And of course, I got on forums and said, "Hey, what happened?" And everybody told me, "Oh, you got a bad airbrush." But I didn't believe that, because the airbrush I was using was the same one I saw a guy who did videos online, and his models looked great. And I thought, you know, he makes the airbrush work. It should work for me. It must be something I'm doing. It must be me. It's me, airbrush. It's not you. Anyway, so I started experimenting around and reading and asking questions. And I got some really bad answers, but I got a few good ones too. And it came down to 3 things. And the reason I'm holding up 3 fingers is because otherwise the concept of 3 probably wouldn't have come across. But anyway, never mind. All right, the first thing I learned was that thinning is king. If you don't thin your paints enough, it's not going to work. You can get the best quality paints, the best quality airbrush, the best quality compressor, and if you're shooting too thick, it's going to look awful. It's going to splatter as it comes out. It's not going to go on the model smoothly. There's nothing you can do. Well, everybody said, oh, you thin it to the consistency of 2% milk. And I thought, what the heck does that mean? So what I did finally was I got my airbrush and I put in some 2% milk and I swirled it around in the airbrush so I could visually see what that consistency looked like. And I realized I hadn't been thinning my paints near enough. As I began to thin them properly, all of a sudden, my airbrushing started looking a little better. But everything wasn't quite good yet because I had to discover something else. Okay, the second thing that I discovered was that air pressure has a whole lot to do with airbrushing. Just dialing in any number or just taking it right out of the compressor without any kind of adjustment may not always work. So what I started doing was I just kind of picked a number that seemed to be the average of what most people were using, which was between 15 and 20 psi. So I set it about 18 and I started working with that. And then I would adjust it down a little bit and see how it changed. And then I'd adjust it up and see how it changed. I've pretty much settled on that 18 psi number because it works for me. But air pressure is a critical part of the whole picture. And no matter which airbrush you get, if you don't deal with that, it's not going to really matter. Of course, once you get the thinning question answered and the air pressure question answered, there's a final piece of the puzzle that there is no way to get around, no way at all. And this is the part that when everybody's shouting out which airbrush you should buy, very few people will actually tell you the most important thing. And the most important thing is practice. Practice is the most important thing in airbrushing. You can get this airbrush or any other airbrush. If you don't practice, it's not going to matter. Because no airbrush, no matter how good the quality is, no matter how good your air pressure is, no matter how good your understanding of thinning the paints is, if you're not doing it over and over and over again, you will not improve. Because in order to improve, you have to make mistakes. If you don't do it, you can't make mistakes to learn from. Nobody goes into it and does it 100% right the first time. If you've ever seen The Matrix, you remember the scene where Neo and Morpheus are jumping from one building to the other, and Morpheus, he just jumps right over, you know? And then it's Neo's turn, and he just gets himself ready to go, and he jumps, and he just falls straight down and bounces down into the concrete, you know? And the bald dude that they later blow away with a laser gun, oh, did I spoil that? Sorry. He says, everybody falls the first time. I don't care how good you are. The first time you use an airbrush, you're going to look at it and you're going to go, that's not quite what I was hoping for. Second time you use it, you're probably going to say the same thing. There is no magic formula. There is no step-by-step that's going to make you really good at airbrushing other than practice. Recently, a guy emailed me And he said some very kind things about a model I'd built and some of the airbrush work I'd done on it. And I was very grateful to hear that. Everybody loves getting, you know, pats on the back. But he finished off his email. He said, you know, what did you do to learn to airbrush in that way? So I wrote him back, you know, thanked him and, you know, said a few nice things, opening up the message. And then I said, not to be flippant, but I airbrushed 300 models. And I gave a little discussion that in a way sounded a bit like this video. And he messaged back and said something to the effect of, thanks, but what do you say is the one secret? And I had to write back and go, there is no secret. There isn't one. It's not a piece of equipment. It's not anything that I can tell you a number or a method. You know, I can't say if you go 7 and blue or yellow for Paul, you know who you are, that's going to be the secret to it. To airbrush well, you have to airbrush. There is no way around it. If you're living in fear of messing up, you're not going to improve. You have to be willing to mess up some models. And by mess up, I don't mean they're going to fall apart. But you're going to have to be willing to work hard at it, put a lot of hours into it, only to look at it at the end and go, that's not quite what I was going for. And in that process, you learn what to do next time. Maybe it's some mechanic of it. Maybe it's further refinement of learning about thinning or air pressure. But a lot of it is just memory of muscle memory, of controlling the trigger, of the distance you hold things from the surface of the model in different conditions. Let me take that for example. Quite often I see new people ask, how far do you hold the airbrush from the model? There is no correct answer for that because it depends on so many factors. It depends on the air pressure you're shooting at. It depends on how thin your paint is. It depends on what effect you're trying to get. If you're doing wide area coverage, it's okay to pull back a little further. If you're doing a freehand camouflage scheme, you may need to get right down in there. But that also depends on thinning and air pressure to be able to get right down in there. So only through the process of repetition are you going to be able to figure out these 1,000 little variables that will allow you to get the kind of results that you're starting out a project with a vision in your head of how it should look. Imagine for a minute, let's get out of the world of airbrushing. Imagine for a minute that you're learning to drive. You have the finances to get a new car, so you're going to go out, buy a new car, learn to drive. And so you ask some friends, hey, I'm thinking about learning to drive. What kind of car should I get? If they start answering, hey, you need to go out and get a Corvette, or you need to go out and get a Lamborghini, or you need to go out and get a pickup truck, or you just need to go out and get a beater car that barely gets by, that's answering the wrong question. The right answer is you probably need to go to driving school to learn how to drive, and then they put you in a car that allows you to practice how to drive. So in the real world, we don't approach things the way we often do when it comes to giving advice for airbrushing. We know the way you learn to drive is to drive. And you can be driving for several years and still not be really competent at it yet. Whereas somebody else may be, man, they just get in and they take right to it. Everybody's a little different. It's the same way with airbrushing. Paying attention to the basics is going to be the way to get to the point you need to be at to be able to execute on the model what you see in your head. That's the secret to it all. Okay, at this point, if you're still watching, and thank you for watching, if you're still watching, you may be thinking, yeah, but I still need to know what kind of airbrush should I get? Well, as I mentioned earlier, you want to get something that's a quality airbrush in terms of engineering. You don't want to get the knockoff airbrushes that are copies, that are poorly engineered. So you do want to get one from the major brands, Badger, Iwata, Pache, or Pash, or Paschi, however you say it. There's going to be some major brands that people are going to tell you. I like Badger. It's what I've used. It works for me. The airbrush that I use almost 90% of the time is a Badger Patriot 105. Now, again, I'm not saying you have to get this airbrush, but I know this works. If you're as old as I am, you remember there was a time when people said nobody ever got fired for buying IBM. Nobody's ever going to get fired for buying a Badger Patriot 105. It works. The reason I recommend it is it's a dual action airbrush, meaning you push down for air and you pull back for paint. It's got a gravity feed cup, which is going to be a little easier to clean and allow you to shoot at somewhat lower air pressures. Yeah, there's siphon feed and there's side feed and there's single action and there's all sorts of other things. But if you're needing one recommendation, this is what I recommend. Even if you pick another brand, I still recommend this type of airbrush because it's going to remove more of the obstacles that you may face using other types. I have used single action airbrushes. I've used siphon feed. I've used side feed. In the 300 plus models I've built, this is the combination that I've settled on because it works really well. It's a big investment. It's not something you go into just thinking, hey, let me go, unless you've got the finances for it, you know, let me just go throw around $100, $200. But the trick is, if you look, you can find a type of airbrush like that in most regions for less than $100 US. I've got this one. This is a Badger Chrome airbrush. I got this one on sale for $56. So if you look around, there are good bargains. But get yourself a good quality piece of equipment so that the equipment is not going to hinder you. But having said that, once you get that piece of equipment, it's all about thinning and air pressure and practice. You can't get around those things. They have to be addressed. You have to learn to use them properly. And you only do that through repetition. I hope this discussion has been helpful to kind of give you some information that will be useful as you start your airbrush journey, or if you're looking to upgrade your airbrush. I've seen quite a few guys that have airbrushed some and they decide, hey, I need a second airbrush, but they haven't had enough experience with the one they have to really get a good idea for what criteria will help them in picking another airbrush, or even why they need another airbrush, other than just a modeler's insane need to have more than one airbrush. So I hope this has been helpful in that way. Now, future videos, I'm going to cover picking a compressor, picking an air source. That's real important. And it can, depending on the conditions you're airbrushing in, the choice of your air source can help make the final result better, or it can hinder you. So I'll look at that. I'll also do a practical demonstration in a future video of thinning your paints, of air pressure, of getting the paint on the model. So there will be some demonstration that I'll do in a future video, so look for that. And finally, thanks for watching this video. I do appreciate it. If you have not already done so, I would be most grateful if you would subscribe to this channel in the subscribe button down here, I think, and subscribe to the channel. Check out my blog, check out my Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, all of those things. There's links down below in the description. Of course, I have a Patreon link down there also. I would be most grateful for your support on Patreon. It helps me to be able to pay for the models and the paint and the things that I do to put this content out. And of course, for the folks that are supporting me on Patreon, thank you so much for doing so. I'm most grateful for it. So the next time that you hear this guy say, well, let me tell you what you need to do. What you need to do is you need to get several of the Chinese-made airbrushes and combine the parts and mill them down to a specific consistency, and you'll get the best airbrush in the world. And as soon as you do, it magically transforms everything you do. I heard some guy over on Facebook quoting a forum somewhere that he once read. He said it was great, so it must be true. When you hear stuff like that, and believe me, I've heard stuff that sounds close to that. When you hear stuff like that, you'll be able to go, hey, look, it's air pressure, thinning, and practice. That's what it is. No airbrush in the world will overcome that. Anyway, thanks for watching. Thanks for keeping up with my work. Thanks for letting me be part of your hobby. And happy day to you, friends. Bye-bye.